The shotgun was the first thing William Harper saw when the door swung open. Not the woman holding it, though she came into focus quickly enough, but the barrel, long and dark, and leveled with a kind of steadiness. That told him this wasn't the first time she'd pointed it at a stranger. He stopped walking, lifted both hands slowly, letting his worn leather satchel dangle from his fingers like a flag of surrender. "I'm not armed," he said, "and I'm not trouble. Every man who's ever stood on my porch said something close to that." Her voice was flat, certain. "Keep your hands where I can see them." He did. Abigail Turner stood in the doorway of the farmhouse like she'd been built into it. Solid, composed, her dark hair pinned back without ceremony, her dress plain and functional. She was 30 years old, and there wasn't a soft edge on her. Not in her posture, not in her eyes, not in the finger resting alongside the trigger guard with practiced calm. William took her in the way a man does when he knows one wrong. Word ends the conversation permanently. She wasn't afraid of him. That much was clear. She was simply measuring him. The way you measure lumber before you decide if it's worth cutting. "My name is William Harper," he said. "I came from Dodge City. Before that, Wichita, I heard in town that the Turner farm might be looking for hands." "You heard wrong. Ma'am, I'm not asking for wages." He kept his voice even. "I'm asking for a roof. The barn would do. In exchange, I work. Sun up to sundown. Whatever needs doing. Fencing, planting, irrigation, livestock. I know the work. Every drifter knows the work until the first hard week." She hadn't lowered the gun. "Then they disappear and leave things worse than they found them. I won't disappear. That's also been said before." She looked at him a long moment at the road dust on his coat, the cracked leather of his boots, the hat that had been through at least 2 Kansas summers and showed every one of them. She looked at his hands still raised, and she noticed what most people would have missed. They were calloused in the right places. Not the soft palms of a man pretending at labor, but the specific hardened skin of someone who had driven fence posts and pulled rope and guided a plow across resistant earth for years. She noticed, but she didn't lower the gun. "I don't take in strays, Mr. Harper. I'm not asking for charity. I'm proposing a trade." "I heard what you proposed." She tilted her chin slightly toward the road. "Millhaven is 6 miles east. There's a boarding house. Mrs. Cruddy takes in men willing to work for room and board. I passed through Millhaven." He held her gaze. "I heard about your situation from a man named Porter at the feed store. He mentioned the Turner farm. 200 acres, he said. A woman running it alone since last winter." Something shifted in her expression. Not softness, more like the drawing back of a curtain to reveal a harder surface beneath. He talked enough. William lowered his hand slightly, slowly, watching her eyes for permission. She didn't raise the gun further, so he continued. "I also heard about the letter from the land office. Something about a debt note coming due in 60 days. The silence that followed was the heaviest kind. Abigail Turner had received that letter 3 weeks ago. She'd read it 4 times, burned it on the 5th reading, and told exactly no one. Not the neighbors, not the reverend, not the women at Sundays service who watched her with that particular combination of pity and curiosity she'd come to despise. She had kept the problem, sealed inside herself the way you keep a cracked dam with sheer pressure and determination, praying it held until she figured out the solution. And now this stranger on her porch knew about it. "Get off my land," she said. Her voice was quieter now, which made it more dangerous. "Ma'am," I said. "Get off." He picked up his satchel, settled his hat, turned and walked 3 steps down the porch, and then stopped because he'd heard it before she said a word. The low, strained groan of old timber giving way, followed by the crash of the south fence section collapsing against the post. Across the yard, 4 of her cattle moved immediately toward the gap, slow and inevitable as water finding its level. William set down his satchel, walked to the fence, and had the cattle turned back and the post braced with a fallen rail inside 4 minutes. He didn't look back at her while he did it. He didn't make a show of the work. He simply did what needed doing with the efficient, unhurried confidence of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. When he finished, he walked back to the porch, picked up his satchel, and looked up at her. The shotgun was no longer raised. It hung at her side. Her expression hadn't changed, but something behind it had. "The barn," she said finally, the words arriving like they cost her something. "You sleep there. You eat after I've eaten. You don't come into this house unless I call for you. You leave the moment I tell you to leave. No argument, no delay." "Agreed," William said. And Mr. Harper, her eyes held his with the full weight of everything she wasn't saying. "I'll be watching." He nodded once. "I'd expect nothing less." 3 weeks passed and the Turner farm began to breathe again. It happened gradually, the way recovery always does, not in dramatic moments, but in small accumulating evidence. A repaired irrigation channel that now pulled water evenly across the east field. A chicken coop re-leveled and relatched so the losses to foxes stopped overnight. 2 acres of compacted soil broken, up and reseeded using a rotation pattern that Abigail hadn't seen applied since her father worked land in Ohio 30 years ago and 500 meters away. She watched all of it from careful distances, said little, adjusted nothing. William worked without instruction and without complaint. He was up before her every morning. She knew because the barn lantern was always all ready, lit when she stepped onto the porch at first light, and the sound of labor reached her before she'd finished her coffee. He asked questions only when necessary, listened completely when she answered, and never once pushed against the boundaries she'd drawn on that first evening. The farm improved. She noticed, she didn't say so. What she noticed more, though she wouldn't have admitted it to anyone in Millhaven, was how he worked. There was knowledge in it that didn't fit the picture of a drifter passing through Kansas with a worn satchel and cracked boots. When one of her mares developed a respiratory infection, William didn't guess at the treatment. He diagnosed it, named it, and described the precise herbal compressed remedy in the same breath with the quiet confidence of someone recalling education rather than experience. When he restructured the irrigation channel, he sketched the revised gradient in the dirt first, using calculations she recognized as deliberate and accurate. Drifters didn't do that. She filed the observation away and said nothing. The town, however, said plenty. Millhaven was the kind of small that made everyone's business communal property. By the end of the second week, Abigail had received 3 visits from well-meaning neighbors and 1 pointed conversation after Sunday service from Reverend Dalton, who spoke carefully about appearances and propriety and the particular vulnerability of a young widow's reputation. She had listened to all of it with the same expression she wore for bad weather, acknowledging its presence without granting it any power over her plans. But the pressure accumulated, she felt it. It was on a Tuesday evening, mending a pile of work clothes she'd collected from the barn, William's coat among them, badly torn along the left shoulder seam, that she found the letter. It had slipped into the inner lining through a torn pocket seam. She wouldn't have seen it at all except that it crinkled under her needle and she pulled it free automatically, thinking it was a scrap of paper, something meaningless. It wasn't. The envelope was of good quality, the kind that came from offices, not from ordinary correspondence. The return address read Harper Land and Cattle Holdings, Wichita, Kansas. The name at the top of the letter inside read Caldwell Harper. She read it twice. Then she set down her needle. Caldwell Harper, the name she'd been quietly dreading since the letter arrived from the land office. Caldwell Harper, whose debt note held her farm's future in its grip, whose representative had twice ridden through Millhaven asking questions about the Turner property's productivity and acreage. The man who had foreclosed on the Granger family east of town, the Pattersons north of it, and 3 other farms across the county in the past 2 years alone. William was his son. She was sitting on the porch when he came in from the fields at dusk, and the